All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is our MLK Day event on behalf of Racial Truth and Reconciliation, Historical Perspectives, Reckoning the Past and Reconciling the Present. My name is Chloe Edwards with Voices for Virginia's Children. I'm going to first pass the mic to our CEO who will kick off this event, Amy Streit.
Thank you, Chloe. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Streit, and I'm the CEO of Voices for Virginia's Children. I truly wish there was no need to hold an event such as today's, but there is. And so I welcome you to Racial Truth and Reconciliation, Historical Perspectives, Reckoning the Past and Reconciling the Present. Join us as we in America, Virginia, and here at Voices continue on our journeys toward racial truth and reconciliation. On January 6th, we watched the events unfold at the United States Capitol and experienced a whole host of feelings: fear, anger, heartbreak, rage, confusion, and more as we witnessed white supremacy on full display. Unfortunately, our children and youth saw this too. Many children who saw or heard the violence at the Capitol experienced racial trauma. So what does that mean? Racial trauma is the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias, ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. An individual who experiences an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncontrollable racist encounter is at risk of suffering from race-based traumatic stress. In the US, we recognize that those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color are most vulnerable to racial trauma due to living under a system of white supremacy. And we know that when young people face adversity, they can experience long-term impact on their physical, social, emotional health and well-being over a lifetime. Voices for Virginia's Children is deeply committed to working internally and externally to create spaces within which to have tough conversations, advocate for policies that support healthy, resilient, and equitable communities, and foster and bring about systemic changes that strengthen us all, especially children. So thank you. Thank you for coming together today to share some of your journey with our journey toward racial truth and reconciliation. And now it's my great privilege to turn things over to my colleague and the creator of today's event, Chloe Edwards.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. I am the founder of Voices for Virginia's Children's Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia and serve as our advocacy and engagement manager. On August 2nd to August 8th, Virginia hosted its first Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, which was recognized by Governor Ralph Northam through a proclamation. Now the cause is known as Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia, a campaign with a coalition that implements its mission to empower marginalized communities in acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice. Today, we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a reverend, civil rights leader, and activist who embodied cultural resilience, truth, reconciliation, healing, peacemaking, and justice. Today's event, Racial Truth and Reconciliation, will examine historical perspectives, reckoning the past, and reconciling the present. Our artists and panelists will highlight themes related to Virginia's legacy of cultural, racial, and historical trauma. Racial trauma refers to the stressful impact or emotional pain of one's experience with racism and discrimination. Historical trauma is held personally, and it is transmitted across generations. Family members who may have not experienced the trauma directly can still feel the effects of the event later. When members who share the same identity, such as skin color, sex, gender, or orientation, feel they have been subjected to a horrendous event that leaves permanent marks that impact their memories and changes their identity in irrevocable ways, this is known as historical trauma. It grounds their identity formation forever. Examples of this include American slavery, the Trail of Tears, and the Holocaust. Now, before we begin, I would like to first invite each of us to recognize the indigenous lands we reside on. These lands were once home to indigenous Americans prior to being colonized in the name of white supremacy and manifest destiny. Indigenous Americans faced horrendous treatment and conditions, including starvation, assault, diseases, and more. Today, we acknowledge this in recognition of the lands that we reside on. They were not ours. I'll start. I reside on the Utenon land in Henrico, Virginia. If you'd like to acknowledge the land you reside on, you can comment on our Facebook page or via chat. If you do not know the land you reside on, this is okay. In the future, you can Google it online to be mindful of it next time. While we are acknowledging the lands that we reside on, I would also like to honor the ancestors that we have lost this year due to COVID-19, white supremacy, racial inequities, and more. I would first like to honor my Aunt Gwendy, who was a freedom rider and faced violent conditions while fighting for freedom with her fellow activists. This included beatings, slashings of tires, and even death. We may also take a moment to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you would like to honor your ancestor, please comment or vocalize the ancestor you have in mind. We will respond with an ashe, which is a West African proverb, which means the power to make things happen, and so let it be. And I'll create space for those that would like to honor an ancestor. If you are on our Facebook Live, you can comment it on the page. And also those who witnessed the comment can respond with an ashe. All right, moving forward, please note that some of the content discussed may be triggering. It may include references to suicide, assault, and severe maltreatment. You may feel a whirlwind of emotions. Please use the Mental Health America warm line at any time. If you are in a crisis and do not need a warm line, call the National Suicide. You can also, in addition, you can also call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. If you would like to text the Mental Health America line, that would be 7417-741. Would also like my colleagues to post that link as well. We, in addition, have a professional mental health clinician present, Sophia Wilson. If you are in the Zoom room or on Facebook Live, please contact our Voices staff member. In the Zoom room, your point of contact will be Emily Griffey. On the Racial Truth page, your contact will be Lauren Snellings. And if you are on the Facebook Voices page, the contact will be Megan Mbaglu. They will then connect you to Sophia Wilson. Now, I would like to pass the mic to my colleague, Allison Gilbreth, who will introduce herself and present our virtual artist showcase.
Thank you, Chloe, and happy Martin Luther King Day to everyone. As Chloe said, my name is Allison Gilbreth, and I'm the Policy and Programs Director at Voices for Virginia's Children. This year, Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia is hosting its first advocacy cohort with the theme of amplifying the truth of the people. Cohort participants are present in the Zoom room and include youth, caregivers, and art activists. I am pleased to present to you our art activist cohort who will engage in a showcase, which was first founded last year on Martin Luther King Day, after the Trauma Advocacy Day was dominated by white supremacists. Today, we reclaim this space. I'm going to introduce each artist one at a time. They will present, and then we will move into the next artist. Our first artist today is Eric Dugan, a poet.
Hello, mic check, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, hi, my name is Eric Dugan. I'm a spoken word artist that lives in Richmond, Virginia. You can find me on Facebook at Eric Dugan, Instagram, EricD2021, and my website will be coming soon, so go ahead and bookmark that page, powerfulwords.com. I want to say it's an honor to be here today for this event. I want to thank Voices for Virginia Children and the representatives of the museums participating in the panel discussion along with the rest of the artists. I reside on the land of Utenon, and I'm honoring my father who transitioned in March 2020. I believe events like today are necessary. As individuals, we all have our own experiences, and art is a way to express those experiences. Written and spoken word inspires us to take action. Action changes our lives as a community. This is Power from Words, and I present my poem titled Love Over Hate. My pen is frozen, stuck on the same page in rage as my ink splatters on these concrete walls. This poem is for the mentally ill locked away for their mind, the ones incarcerated for nonviolent crime, the ones slain in hate's name. I'm triggered. This poem is for Constantine's Cross, the slave masters, the Ku Klux Klan, the Westboro Baptist Church, priests that wear invisible hoods as anyone else that uses God's name to execute another. I am triggered. This poem is for politicians wearing clown suits, liquor stores in every ghetto corner, rifles lining NRA pockets, children are chained to cages, and I am triggered. This poem is for all the shots fired in the churches, the schools, and the streets as our young keep dying. Emmett Till, John Bowie, Cavance Hall, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Michael Brown, Philando Castillo, Marcus David Peters, Elijah McClain, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the rest not named, all slain in hate's name. I'm triggered. See, I'm triggered on the ones that are locked inside their own prison minds. They fear immigrants, they fear Muslims, they fear Rastas, they fear God, they fear you, they fear I, they fear Black, they fear the East, they fear what is different than them. But fear is going to be the death of them. See, I intend to use these words and create arrows to trigger the minds that need it most. Synthesize their insides with their own violin strings, cut through their entanglement, because fear is just a four-letter word. It is only heard if you listen. The possibilities if you went deaf to fear. You can fly like angels with wings and know what I know, that love has no boundaries. It's just a religion without the God that you fear. But some of y'all forgot about love and chose hate. Now it's out of my hands now. So all I have is words. Break them down to mere syllables. What do you have? Design to change minds by giving a peace of mind. What put together reveals the whole mind. Words cut deep. Help my pen move free. Rip through fear's grip until you realize you and I are one. One with the moon, one with the sun, one with the galaxies. See, people are in the streets bleeding, starving, crying, and dying. So please shed your ignorance. Choose love over hate. You put down your triggers, I'll put down mine. Help me to create new lines that do not break hearts when spoken. Lines where the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of a man's eyes. Lines where people do not have the right to break generational trauma. Lines where we do not need to educate people on the simple principle of equal rights and justice. Help me to create new lines like Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King, lines of wisdom, integrity, resilience, and truth, lines that heal, reconcile, and provide justice for all, lines written for this generation and the ones to come, lines written not to change tomorrow, but to change today. And until these lines are etched in our history, my voice will not go silent.
Thank you so much. We're going to give great applause at the end for all of our artists. Our next artist today is Chloe Edwards, a writer and a poet.
Hi, everyone. As an English major and social justice minor, along with public policy, my work has interwoven themes of my personal life and social justice. I'll perform a poem titled Roots, which is metaphorical for the concept of Black hair, as it was a form of communication for many things prior to slavery, including status, tribal affiliation, and culture. It's also metaphorical for what guides us. For me, you'll find references of family, culture, and spirituality. Lastly, it's metaphorical for both adversity, trauma, and cultural resilience and overcoming all odds. You can visit my work at chloeiedwards.org if you'd like to learn more. Roots. 400 years, hands made of brick, legs thick like Nana steak. Plucked and plowed like no tomorrow. Live life with hopes that look one day. 400 years ago, I would have been cargo, but I was born in 1995 and 400 angels wrap their voices around me. Black babies don't need rockin' bassinets. You see, there's comfort in culture. This year's theme is roots. Brazilian curls in my hair, mama always knew, put that good holy water on and bounced. To the rhythm of gospel music, soulful sermons covered all the kids in her household. We all need roots. Call it American culture, everyone's good. But if you ask me how I'm doing, I tell you I'm powerful. See, I got writers like on Wendy, she was a freedom writer, but then I think of all the powers that are higher than me: hierarchy, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, inequality. There's power in oppression. Gotta be 10 times smarter, work 10 times harder, dress for success, but don't dress too cultural. Perfectionism at its finest. But shrinkage is a real thing and activism is tiring. Plus I got roots, childhood trauma, adversity, slavery. Look at the pictures of my childhood in between T.D. Jakes' sermons and Kirk Franklin's Imagine Me, yeah, see. Paternity test, my last name changing. See this mark under my chin from one of mama's beatings. She stays in her room all day, but that's better than drinking. I gain hierarchy in the household, led the triplets like troops, told them, remember your roots. Think of the roots of my mama. Her mama always preached off that liquor before she switched to Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Think of my father, 8 years lost to the cycle of addiction and incarceration. See, my mama don't drink, she get drunk in the spirit, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Why you think gospel music always brings me back to these roots? I think of seesaws, pray that Black power is more powerful than trauma and epigenetics, nature versus nurture. We are not our trauma, we are more than what happened to us, we have roots. Dr. King addressed unfulfilled dreams at the March on Washington, then was sentenced by white supremacy. This is America. The Angola 3 in solitary confinement longer than any known prisoner. This is America. Breonna Taylor awakening to gunshots. No justice for Breonna Taylor. This is America. These are our roots. I pray that resiliency overcomes the trauma. Look at all that data. Pray that I don't become one of those numbers. Remember your roots. Roots don't just grow cotton, fingers pick trees of wisdom, fluff the worries of yesterday. We all need roots like Nana advocates in the kitchen, teeth strong enough to rip chicken chains, breaking the ways of yesterday. We need roots, queens like mama, children of God, march with godliness, speak in tongues with authority, bask in all your class and sassiness. Ay. Get to know your roots like Aunt Karen. Let me tell you what Jehovah said right here in this Bible. We study watchtowers and prep talks, hold on to a sense of higher power, a sense of morality. Be vulnerable with your roots. Aunt Wanda will tell you what runs in the family. We don't have to pass down flaws to the next generation. Own your imperfections. Work on them. Own the elegance of your roots. Grandma always taught me how to do things the right way. If you're gonna do it, sugar, do it good. Your ancestors succumbed 400 years of slavery. Stay glued to your roots like Aunt Rhonda. What are y'all doing for Black History Month? We spend time with Maggie Walker, walk the streets of Jackson Ward, stomp on the segregation of redlining. Let me tell you what the culture told me. We are not our trauma. We are more than what happened to us. We have roots. When you're drowning, drown in the intellect of Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the confidence of the Black Panther Party, the perseverance of Angela Davis. We don't need cradles. You rock with your roots. I pray that the power of the people gives you the strength when you're weak. Pray that these words gives you the comfort you need. Hold on to your roots. Be what your elders and ancestors raised you to be. We need roots by Chloe Edwards.
Yes, I'm here for it. Love it. Okay, we have to move to our next artist, who is Bridget Stottlemyer. I hope I said your name correctly.
Yeah, you did. So hi, everybody. My name is Bridget Stottlemyer. I'm an artist and an educator in Richmond and Fredericksburg areas. So I live in Richmond, but I work in Stafford County and in Fredericksburg. And I'm also a visual artist, so I'm going to share my screen here and hope that that works for you all. So let me know if you can see this. Good. Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to partake in an artist showcase, which is something I don't think we do a lot in equity work, but even though art has a really big role to play in equity work. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to the other artists who have been sharing. So here you see a digital rendering of myself and my fiance. Yeah, so I'm glad to get to share this with you. It also includes, as you see, like a lot of my reckoning with racial reconciliation. So here you see a rendering of myself and my fiance. We took a picture like this at Marcus David Peters Circle, which currently holds the Robert E. Lee Monument, decorated with opportunities for reflection, engagement, and activism. And like those who have contributed to bringing this reckoning to the once capital of the Confederacy, I have to think of the history that has brought us here and the history that we stand on every day. As a white woman, I have to choose to reckon with this history. I have the privilege of opting out, but I have the obligation to opt in. I stand as shown in this art piece with my Black Ghanaian American fiance, and we look forward to having one day having biracial children who we know will be seen and treated as Black. And so my obligation to opt into reckoning with this history only increases its pressure. And like Chloe Edwards said, we stand on inhabited lands, or once inhabited lands, once owned by first Americans and worked by enslaved African Americans. And as a white woman marrying a Black man, I have to reckon with the way that my ancestors once captured and enslaved his. I have to reckon with the way that they divided African tribes against each other so they could conquer and colonize them. I have to reckon with how they then used science to justify the suppression of his ancestors. As a white Christian, I have to reckon with the way that Christianity was and has been used to suppress communities of color and encouraged slavery with whitewashed sermons and the slave Bible. As a white teacher, I have to reckon with being a part of the 80%, in Virginia, a part of the even greater than 80%, part of 80% of other white women educators. I have to reckon with how integration eliminated an entire generation of Black educators to keep educators like me. I have to recognize how redlining kept neighborhoods segregated and thus schools segregated. And as a future white parent to biracial children, I have to reckon with the bias that my children will face as not being white enough or not being Black enough, or the comments that they will face like mixed babies are so pretty, or mixed children will end racism. So this is my reckoning. But just like we have freed the Marcus David Peters Circle, I believe that freedom is coming. I see it on days like Martin Luther King Day. I have hope for it. I look forward to days like this where we will look at a monument that once glorified a Confederate general and only see hope and only see freedom, and see all of the other beauty that people have brought to this space. So yeah, this is my art. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, Bridget, so much for sharing that wonderful piece. Our next artist showcase is Justin Ingram.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Chloe. It's my privilege and honor to be here. This is an amazing day today. I will go ahead and share my screen. I do charcoal portrait art, mainly on historical Black icons. So I believe if everyone can see, this is, I did a piece, it's entitled Leaders of Change. It's a 5-foot by 3-foot mixed media piece that I just finished up. It consists of 8 charcoal portraits of both local and national leaders. These were placed over top local newspapers from Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico, that I collected during the past summer with articles and pictures highlighting the movement for Black lives, which was largely led by our youth. The articles and words highlight the movement to reconcile Virginia's struggle with its past and the work toward a more just and equitable future. The portraits of these local leaders is a way of recognizing their contributions and to highlight the fight and causes for which they work tirelessly and usually without any recognition at all. So these portraits, they're an appreciation of these leaders' work, and I'm hopefully they can amplify these leaders of change and their causes. And so what I'll do is I'll start from the top, and so in the top left, this is Mr. Tavares Marks. Tavares is a Central Virginia social justice activist and an organizer. He does specific work in criminal justice reform and wrongly held Black youth in our prison and jail systems locally. He is a U.S. Army veteran and is a frequent voice for marginalized communities throughout Central Virginia. Of course, we have, I chose to work in some very well-known figures: Michelle Obama, First Lady, advocate for minority youth who has empowered millions to rise up. And I quote, "When they go low, we go high." Next, we have, there's so much more I could say about First Lady Michelle Obama, but we'll focus on the local people. Next, we have Naquita. Naquita is, she's based in the Tri-Cities. She's a social and economic justice advocate. She has an emphasis on youth and minorities communities. She is chairwoman of the Youth Services Commission through the Hopewell Office on Youth and founder of Women of Endurance. It's a nonprofit which helps abused minority women find support. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. He is the centerpiece of today, and I believe everyone on this during this discussion knows Martin Luther King Jr. But I will just civil rights icon, leader, secured and fought for multiple federal civil rights bills and acts. Why we are here today. We've got Gerald Knapper. Gerald Knapper is a proud Black father. Gerald hails from the Church Hill area of East Richmond. He is the current director of the Hopewell Office on Youth and is a founder and activist of numerous social and economic justice organization. He is U.S. Army retired. Next, we have Terrence Doctor. Let's see. One second. Where's Terrence? I apologize. I might have to come back to Terrence. I did not get his picture. So I will come back to Terrence. Kamala Harris, everyone knows now, Wednesday she will be sworn in as the Vice President of the United States of America. She will be the first Black, she will be the first woman, she will be the first South Asian executive office holder in United States history, other than, well, for two of those reasons. She's a breaker of many boundaries, and she is a hero and inspiration to millions. Lastly, I have Chloe, and A lot of us know Chloe from being on this call right now. Chloe Edwards is a Richmond-based advocate. She is an engagement manager at Voices for Virginia's Children. She is a leader at Black Lives Matter 804. She has been recognized in Style Weekly as top 40 under 40 for her work in empowering the voices of marginalized communities.
Justin, before you stop your share, there's so many comments on Facebook asking if you can enlarge at least one of your images so folks can get a closer view. Do you mind doing that for us real quick? And you can just double click on any one of your images.
Did that work?
No. You may have to switch your share to that exact image that you just opened. And if you can't, that's all right.
What? Can you hold on 1 second?
Sure.
Might get some assistance.
And while we're waiting for Justin to share these images with us, for folks who are watching over Facebook, if you could just write in some of the comments of how you're feeling, what you're learning from the art that you're seeing. The conversation has been really great, but I think that biggest request was people were like, can you please zoom in so we can see one or two of them really quickly. And what you may need to do is just stop your share, open one, and then click share on that specific image. We're going to give Justin just a moment to reshare his screen on one image for us. All right. Thank you, Justin. We have, everyone can see a large graphic of several of the portraits that look absolutely amazing. So I'm gonna leave just a couple of seconds for folks who were wanting that information. And I know there were also some comments requesting your artist information that we're gonna make sure we have in the comment section. So thank you so much, Justin. If you wanna click your stop share. All right, thank you so much. Our next artist to share with us today is Stephen Green.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Green. I'm a graphic designer and illustrator and currently enrolled at Full Sail University for computer animation. Let's see. This is the piece that I've been working on right here, and it represents tearing down the boundaries of racism and oppression. As you can see, we have a sliver of the wall broken, but it's going to take some time for us to demolish it all the way through. And for the next generation to just live in peace and prosper. Hate is learned. It's not something that you are born with. And if we can tear down those walls, it'll be a better place. That's all I have to say about it.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing your beautiful piece with us. And I'd love, again, for folks in the comments to just share your responses to this artwork as we work through today's piece. Our next artist to share with us is, oh, I love her. She was a former MSW intern of mine, Sophia Booker, and she is going to be sharing her art through poetry today.
Hi, everyone. I'm doing a tech check, so can everyone hear me? Great. So I do a lot of advocacy work. As Allison mentioned, I was at Voices as an intern. And so I had a lot of experience with advocacy as far as advocating for foster care and things like that. So today I'm showing another side of me. I'm going to do poetry today. But first, I have a piece of artwork that I made to go along with my poetry. So I don't know if everyone can see it, but it's a picture of a young woman. It's a mixed media art. So her clothing and her headband is fabric, and then her crown has like designs and stuff on it. So this is my piece of artwork. I hope you like it. And the poem that I'm going to read today is called "What Do You See?" And it's pretty much just talking about experiences as a Black woman and just my own growth and development over the last couple of years. What do you see? I can't help but think that you see what I see. The oppression that is deeply rooted in our structures, the racism that won't buckle, yet still I stand. Some choose to fight while others choose to stay silent. Rather stay in their comfort zones and ignore what's happening. Must be nice. What do you see? Historical trauma, oppression, civil unrest. I don't like this. Why can't I just be me? Why can't I just live? What do you see? My vision of myself reflected in society views, making it harder for me to choose whether to be authentic or to fuse. Hashtag assimilate, code switch. What do you see? Black women carry the world on their shoulders, but are often invisible in the process. Put armor on every day to prepare for battle, discrimination, expectations, protests, still teaching our sons, daughters, and communities on how to love and be their best. What do you see? Activate her beautiful superwoman powers because she can't show her vulnerabilities. She has to stay strong, not just for herself, but for everyone else. What wonderful abilities. The Black woman is super indeed, but cries in silence as we turn on the TVs and watch our men, women, and children bleed. What do you see? Despite all the trauma, that's not what I see when I look in the mirror every day, changing the narrative to say, I matter. Yes, that's right, I truly matter as I continue to wait for the rest of the world to believe that too. They say the most disrespected person is the Black woman, but don't you dare disrespect yourself, queen. No matter what version of yourself you decide to show to the world, you are still a force, a flower that grows from the concrete. Step into the royalty that you are meant to be. The world's views has nothing on the goddess inside of you. Let your steps create a shining path for those to pave the way to be themselves. Let your steps lay the groundwork society continues to hide from themselves. The harder we step, the harder our walls will fall, crumble into acceptance that all people are created equal. This 400-year journey will end, but we have to continue to fight through our voices, art, and action until we win. Know your truth, be strong, your ancestors will carry you on. Baby girl, hold your head up high like the queen that you are and never fall from the stars because you are a true gem. Unapologetically Black, bold, beautiful royalty. That's who you are, signed by me. Now, what do you see? The end.
Yes, Sophia, I am here for it. Thank you so much for sharing that piece with us. Now, let's give everyone a Zoom clap or snap to express how powerful truth through vulnerability can be. History can be retold in all forms, including art. Art serves as a powerful tool of both truth-telling, advocacy, and activism and racial healing. Now I'm going to pass the mic back to Chloe Edwards.
Allison, in the professional world, we're often told that art isn't professional, but you have each proven yourselves today as both artists, advocates, and professionals. So snaps for you. Now we're going to start the next portion of the event, which is a panel. I'm just going to briefly introduce it. The United States is among the most diverse democracies in the world. However, much of its history includes systems of violence and discrimination that have not only had traumatic consequences for those directly impacted, but affect future generations and communities. Slavery in the United States spanned from the 1600s to the mid-1800s. It is estimated that 6 to 7 million enslaved Africans were imported to the United States during the 18th century alone. The rapid expansion of the cotton industry in the late 1700s and early 1800s made Southern states dependent on slavery for their economy. Virginia was the second largest state for the importation of enslaved Africans and the #1 state for the domestic slave trade. And Richmond, Virginia was the epicenter of that trade. Richmond's economic success in the antebellum is largely due to the impact of the slave trade as a commercial enterprise. In fact, in the 1850s, Richmond's biggest business by dollar volume was not tobacco, not flour, not iron, but slaves. Today, we face a dual pandemic, COVID-19 and racism as a public health crisis in the middle of a modern day civil rights movement. In August 2020, the second March on Washington took place, which followed the first that occurred in 1963, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his historical I Have a Dream speech. As Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia pushes for trauma-informed and equity-informed policies this year to champion legislative changes at the Virginia General Assembly session, we aim to combat the inadvertent disparities that privilege and oppression, racism, and discrimination perpetuate. I will pass the mic back to Allison Gilbraith, who will moderate our panel today.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm so excited for this portion of today's event. We are going to start with introducing each of our panelists, the organization that they're representing today, and the role that they represent within that organization. If you know me or any of our colleagues at Voices, we really want people to bring their whole self to this event. So if you talk with your hands, that's okay. If you snap, whatever. If you're yes, if you know me in real life, you know this is how I talk. So we are going to do and ask you to do that today. I'm going to call on each panelist just to make it easier for us on Zoom while you're in, and ask you to introduce yourself. So I'm going to start with Bill Martin of the Valentine to introduce yourself.
I wasn't the first on the list. I'm Bill Martin. I'm director here at the Valentine Museum, and it is such an honor to be with you this afternoon. You know, I think that there's a quote from Dr. King that calls us together. And it's, we do not make history, we are made by it. And I think that for this moment for Richmond, the Valentine is the place where much of that conversation can happen with the Black History Museum and all of our other cultural partners in this community. It's a two-pronged problem for me personally, and I think for this institution, because here I am that old, white, male Virginian. What do I do with that? And the fact of the matter is you sit and you listen and you pray for change and you pray that you can change. That's true for this institution. I think that Valentine has its moment at this particular time because we have to understand, and I think we are acknowledging for the first time, the critical role that this institution played in the development of the lost cause, this creation of the lost cause. And in fact, the artist, founders, was critically involved, and you've seen his work. It's Jefferson Davis, it's Williams Wickham, it's all of the statues, many of the statues we see around our community. What do you do when it's our history, it's a history that we have been made by, as King said. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and as the Valentine and me personally, I think as we go through this time of listening, but not just listening, but walking away to make change, because enough listening, now it's time for action. And I think that that's the role for the Valentine as we think about my role here after 25 years.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to take a quick step backward and introduce or have them reintroduce themselves, but just a quick wave so we have as much time for the panel as possible.
Sorry, I went too long.
Oh, no. It's all right. We're going to have Chloe Edwards and Amy Streit just quickly say hello and tell us what they do at the organization.
I'll let Amy go first.
Just hello, everybody. Again, my name is Amy Streit, and I'm the CEO of Voices for Virginia's Children. Fairly new in this role and very, very excited to be with you all. And just while I'm speaking, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And Chloe, a special thanks to you for the creation of this event.
Thanks, Amy. And I'm Chloe Edwards. I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager at Voices for Virginia's Children. Back in August, in response to the pandemic, today's modern civil rights movement, and racism as a public health crisis, I founded and launched with my colleagues of color Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, which is now what brings to you today a campaign. I'm also the president of Black Lives Matter 804, and much of my life experiences, including experiencing Virginia's foster care system through kinship care, shapes the work that I offer voices today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you both. And our next panelist is Stephanie Arduini.
Hi, everyone. And again, like Bill said, thank you to Voices for Virginia's Children and for Chloe for inviting us at the American Civil War Museum to be here. I'm the Deputy Director of the American Civil War Museum, and I oversee all of our storytelling. So our programs, education initiatives, but our collections and our exhibits, and what stories we tell, how we tell them, and in particular, how we're trying to encourage people to not only understand and appreciate the history of the Civil War era and its legacies, but think about how we use that understanding, how we use that history in our choices today.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Joseph Rogers. Let's make sure Joseph has.
How about now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Hello, my name is Joseph Rogers. I work with the American Civil War Museum as the Education Programs Manager there. I have the pleasure of being able to be the primary point of contact for students, youth, and families at the museum. I'm the one who gets to talk to our student groups as they go through, engage in this important part of American history, and really tie that legacy to what's going on in their lives today and how to be better both in their understanding and involvement in history, but also in their understanding of their place in the future. And so I have the pleasure of being able to do that, in addition to being able to, in my own personal time, work alongside folks like Alan Charles Chipman, who we'll be talking about later, in trying to make the city of Richmond a better place, specifically with my involvement with the Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Kimberly Wilson.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank everyone for being here today and inviting VMFA to be part of the conversation this afternoon. We're just looking forward to it. And my role at the museum is the Chief Operating Officer, Chief Human Resource Officer, Deputy Director for Museum Operations and Volunteers. So the museum's role, within this conversation is to talk about how we're aspiring to be in this space of this conversation of reconciliation and truth. And how those narratives vibrate throughout our museum experience. Art is the equalizer, and I'm sure all of my museum colleagues would agree that our cultural arts institutions are at the forefront these days of many conversations. And I think bringing our whole self to the conversation today, I'm also representing those individuals in Richmond that were enslaved, my ancestor, John Mitchell Jr., and others that tried to lead that voice after the Civil War to make change and encourage change throughout, not just Virginia, but throughout the nation. I also want to acknowledge the native lands that the Virginia Museum sits on. We're doing a lot of work in trying to establish and recognize those people, in addition to the enslaved individuals that were also located and worked on the land that we sit. So thank you again for having me this afternoon.
Thank you, Kimberly. Our last panelist to join us today is Alan Charles Chipman.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here, to Chloe and Allison and some familiar faces, Brother Joseph, Brother Stephanie, Brother Bill, everybody. My name's Alan Chipman. I'm the faith-rooted organizer and transformation strategist, very long title, at Initiatives of Change. And a lot of the work that we do actually is one of the things that inspires my work is part of the quote that Brother Bill Martin just shared, where Dr. King talks about people are anvils and some people are hammers, where anvils are formed by the times, and but the hammer is the one that does the forming. And he talks about a thermostat versus a thermometer. And so how do we bring people from just being a reflection of their times and doing what one of the proteges of Dr. King, Stokely Carmichael, said, the job of the revolutionary is to make that which is unconscious conscious. So a lot of it is truth telling and help people recognize the history and how it has formed us. As James Baldwin says, we're all formed by this great force, but how do we go beyond just being formed by something, but actually forming and proactively building what Dr. King would call the beloved community. And that's in legislation, art, culture, because the lie has permeated all these things. So it takes a great coalition to correct it. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with our panelist questions with our next one. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was an inclusive and just society for all, regardless of one's identity. We want to know what your immediate reaction to the virtual art showcase is, and how do the themes presented at the showcase resonate with the work that you do? And anyone feel free to jump in first. Just take yourself off of mute. Joseph?
So it was incredibly inspiring to hear all the artists. I know you're all still on the call, and I just want to say an incredible job. Thank you for sharing those words. Thank you for sharing that truth. Thank you for sharing the visions that were there and all presented, because every single one of those really had that common underlying theme of justice right there. And I think that what stood out to me the most, visually at least, we're seeing the faces of individuals that were painted, that were drawn, but also the ones that are juxtaposed with statues and monuments to people that we interpret at our museum. And we take a lot of pride in trying to point out faces and point out individuals and the role and responsibilities of individuals in the space that we try to do this interpretation at the American Civil War Museum. And that is really important, especially for children to understand, as they seek not to try to form hero type relationships with people, but simply to try to form regular relationships with people, to understand that what they are seeing are individuals that they can emulate and people who they can actually take up and be a part of, be in community with. Because one of the things that we know is that when you create someone to be this grand magnanimous figure, whenever those flaws finally do come out, as they always will, it easily allows for people to see it as some kind of failing. And especially when children, our youth, are dealing with these kinds of things, they're trying to say, oh, how do I be this great magnanimous figure? How do I be this great person? Now, what do I do? And then they see each and every one of their flaws reflected as something that they can no longer aspire to be that person, that hero. It's important for us to recognize and humanize all of these individuals. And so talking about the flaws of our heroes, talking about and seeing the power of our community and of individual voices and faces and people who are right there and able for you to touch and engage with, that's incredible. And so hearing these other voices of people talking and expressing their truth, of talking about their roots, knowing that it goes deeper than deep, and seeing that is just something that I'm incredibly grateful for. And I think that is indeed how we actually create this inclusive community that Dr. King spoke about.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I'm going to take a quick step back because I accidentally forgot to include one of our panelists today, which is Vince Brooks from the Library of Virginia. I'm so sorry. I think I accidentally moved some things around. But while you're introducing yourself, I'd also love for you to have the opportunity to share your reactions to the showcase as well.
Great, thanks, Allison. My name is Vince Brooks. I'm a senior local records archivist with the Library of Virginia. For those who don't know, the library is the Commonwealth State Library and archival repository. So basically that means we hold a large amount of published and unpublished materials related to Virginia's history, government, and people. Researchers use our holdings to trace their family histories, research books, investigate the property they live on or the house they live in. Any other reason you can think of to access state and local government records, personal papers, collections, rare books, architectural drawings. Specifically, the reason I'm joining in today, and it's a great pleasure to be here with all of my fellow panelists, and especially the artists who did such a fantastic job, is for our Virginia Untold project. It was an effort undertaken to highlight the records in our collections that document Black, multiracial, and some indigenous people in Virginia before 1870. And you know, I was taking notes furiously as each artist was performing and sharing their work, and it really hit me that this intersection of art and history, of culture and creativity, really makes this information, both the art and what the artist is conveying, and in my case, and in my institution's case, the history, more accessible to people. And you know, for example, in recent years, we've tried during American Archives Month, we worked with a professional organization on something called Remix Virginia, which is getting people to use historical materials and interpret it in a creative way and make the history more accessible, think about it in a different way. And I think these are great examples with the presentations of the artists of ways that you can take both personal history, you know, images of historical figures, and mix those all together and present it in a way that makes it more accessible and makes it easier for people to digest, because as we've all talked about, as a lot of folks have talked about already, these are big issues, and sometimes it can seem like it's too overwhelming to approach it. You know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, you know, so you've got to start with the small bites and get people in and engage them so that then they can do what Bill Martin was talking about and take that information and carry it off and you know, make themselves be willing to address things in their life, in their community, that can mean a change for all of us.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And I want to reiterate one thing that you said, that actually one of the artists who's in our Zoom room commented and said, for better or worse, art tells and writes our history, which is exactly it. There are so many great conversations that I want to keep moving. So I'm going to move us to the next question for the sake that we have as much rich discussion as possible. So what is the role that educational and art entities play in shedding light on the way in which cultural, racial, and racial trauma has impacted communities of color? For example, America's legacy of slavery, the Trail of Tears, personal history of allyship or being impacted by racism. There are a couple of organizations who really wanted to get in on this question. So I'm gonna ask for Kimberly Wilson and Bill Martin and Alan Charles Chapman to kind of go in that order as they wanted to jump in and answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. And I'm thinking that Bill and anyone else that wants to chime in as I'm responding to this question, but I think it's really important with the VMFA as we look at our role in transparency, addressing the past and present by aiming to include all the stories in a multidimensional collective narrative. For example, in our newly remodeled Robinson House, we have transparency in the interpretive panels of what actually happened on this land and in this building, and also the installation of conversations within our Confederate Memorial Chapel, which has always been a place of reconciliation, but just how we interpret that, how we talk about that, how we present that, how we bring the community into these conversations is really critical to the story that we're trying to really connect with. And for our general public also to connect with us and help us tell these stories. I think that's really important. We talked about, as I opened and introduced myself, the land acknowledgement of where we sit as well. You know, how we tell these stories within our exhibitions and our programming that we do, you know, to acknowledge the experience of people that were here way before us, and yet we forget or we change the story or we present it in a way that's not totally accurate. You know, those days are gone. We need to, I think everyone that's present here, we interpret history in the factual and in the truth. And I think that that's really critical to how we connect. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bill, if you'd like to go next, that would be great. You're just on mute. You're on mute, Bill.
You know, that's what happens when you're old. You know, I think that the question was about legacy, wasn't it? The legacy of these things. And when we think about Richmond's legacy, when we really look at that, when we think about this long, broad stretch, we have a unique opportunity in this city to really bring that Richmond's legacy is America's legacy. And so we have this one opportunity, I think, to do it. And when you think about it, let's go through that legacy. It's the legacy of slavery and enslavement. To be that trading where we sold out of Richmond people who'd been in this country for multiple generations. I mean, we forget about this multi-generational impact. When we think about the founding values, we just celebrated Religious Freedom Day. You know, here was a part of our mission is looking at the Statute of Religious Freedom. What do you do with it? Suddenly you know that here is the first government in the world proclaiming freedom of conscience, and 2 blocks away is the center of the domestic slave trade. How do you deal with that? It's about Reconstruction, it's about the Civil War, but I think it's more interesting for us to think about Reconstruction and the readjuster period and Jim Crow and the institutions that so many of us represent sitting here that created it and supported it. These are not just history institutions, but it's healthcare and education. We can go down the list of those institutions that really the framework was set up. But I think that we also need to think about the other legacies, because there is a legacy of resistance and success. And we don't talk about it enough. We need to talk about Gabriel. We need to certainly do the regular names of Maggie Walker. We need to celebrate institutions like Virginia Union University. We need to celebrate Doug Wilder and the thousands of others that have contributed to the leadership in the country. We need to celebrate Black Lives Matter. The power of resistance, and the success of those efforts. And so for me, there's this What's our legacy? There's this legacy, it's a mixed legacy that is important for our children and our visitors to understand the full legacy. And I think that's what museums, history museums and others can do in a way that no one else can do because we've got the stuff.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing those wonderful thoughts, and Alan. And then after that, I'd love to hear from Stephanie as well.
Sure, absolutely. I think this is essential work for education and artists and institutions to play, because public memory is what shapes our priorities, and art forms history makers. When we think of Jim Crow, we always think of laws first, but we don't think about Thomas Daddy Rice and the art that he created, and how it became a slur before it became a law, and how there has to be often some forms of dehumanization precede destruction. And so we have to be very aware of the stories that we tell. W.E.B. Du Bois in The Souls of White Folk talks about there's a certain history that had to be told that left out Black accomplishment, and that only the things that a white person did becomes important. That has a certain psychological effect on people. And you see that in the disdain or the ambivalence towards Black suffering, because if your history says only what white people do count, then Black people's inability to contribute is less of a concern to you. And so it's important that we know these things. And an indigenous activist, Janae Yerxa, says, a colonized mind is unable to tell how the past has formed the present. And so when we always see things as these separate things, but Dr. King speaks about this, he talks about the hardest thing to do is to stay awake during a revolution. He tells the story of Rip Van Winkle and saying when he went to sleep, there was one king, and when he woke up, there was another one. And so I guess the question for institutions and truth-telling institutions is our work helping to keep people awake, or is it helping to keep people asleep? And I think that's kind of the call that Dr. King calls for us to do. And also the power in our history, especially as people, and Sister Chloe was talking about this in her poem, about the roots, right? How much power we have in our roots, and how much also we, as a Black person growing up in America, it's very hard for us to find our roots beyond the institution of slavery, right? And so it's also an exciting work because we can help to root people, not just uprooting lies, but also helping to connect people back with their roots so that they can show up in a better way. So those are it's essential.
Thank you for sharing that, Alan. I was thinking about my cousin who's probably watching, who's been doing so much research in our family, and I'll bring my whole self. I'm Creole. Part of me is Creole, and so she's been talking about that part of history of Black Americans that often doesn't get talked about, and it is a different history. It is a story that makes us feel a bit more rooted. And I know Stephanie Arduini had some comments to this question as well.
So I spend time working not only with my own institution, but with colleagues from around the country at other museums. And as has been alluded to in some of my colleagues' comments, a lot of our institutions have deep, old roots. So our own institution dates back to 1896, which was formed as an effort to preserve the house where Jefferson Davis lived in Richmond when he was president. And the women who were preserving that house were the white Richmond elite women who had connections to positions of power and could raise money to not only save that house, but then also use their influence to gather items and tell a story. And as they were collecting those items, they were telling a story that was not only informed by their memory of the past, but also their understanding and priorities in the present, and creating a narrative that was deeply shaped by the lost cause, which was something, for those of you who aren't familiar, that was a very powerful form of memory shaped by ex-Confederates, and it continued to evolve and was based in white supremacy and based in creating a system of elite white rule that still continues to influence our world around us today. But I think just acknowledging as museums that we came from places of power and privilege and made choices throughout our history, choices that some of us who work there today think were terrible in retrospect. We have to own that. We have to own those choices and understand the ramifications and use that understanding as we're making choices now. And I think this relates a lot to what I heard my colleague Joseph say, that idea of that flaw is so important because that's who we are as humans. That's the story of humans that we're telling, for better, for worse, throughout our whole country. And we've got to own those and acknowledge them in order to make those honest, transparent, and effective choices now going forward.
You are receiving some snaps in the comments, some say it louder for the people in the back, which is just awesome and such an honest conversation. I'm going to move us to the next question for our panelists and ask that whoever would like to start just unmute themselves after I ask this question for our audience listening. So, how must history be reckoned with and retold to ensure that communities of color are acknowledged, listened to, and heard? Vince is going to kick us off.
I think we have to begin by telling history truthfully, even if it makes us feel ashamed and uncomfortable. I believe it starts with exposure to information from primary sources. I'm a bit biased in that sense, but many people, even into the present day, and this gets to both Stephanie and Charles Allen's points about how pervasive the lie has been, even people into this day do not have an accurate image of what enslavement and the systems of oppression that existed before and after the Civil War were actually like. Beginning in the mid-50s, Virginia's K through 12 classrooms used commissioned textbooks that portrayed enslavement in glowing terms, touting cheerful enslaved people and benevolent enslavers. One textbook even went as far as portraying a smiling captive African in Western clothes, happily shaking hands with their enslavers on the deck of a ship. And these textbooks were used in Virginia into the 1970s. So the exponential spreading of that lie and that sense, because if you think of it, how many people beyond high school history class investigate this any further? Maybe they watch the History Channel occasionally, but beyond that, folks learn what they learn when they learn it, and just like the trauma that we were talking about earlier gets passed down by generation, misinformation gets passed down through generations. And so it's incumbent upon those of us in the cultural community, as we're sharing information, as Kimberly talked about, that we're transparent, that we put out there even things that make people uncomfortable or perhaps angry. Generations of people learn this history, and it's going to take a while and honest conversation to undo that. And then again, I think it's also critical to present through lines between the past and the present, making people see the connections between slave patrols and over-policing, between black codes and mass incarceration, between redlining and generational wealth. Those are the conclusions that we have to help people recognize, those connections rather, that to help people recognize in our interpretive efforts, in our presentation, that I think are critical to the work that we do to move the communities that we serve forward.
And we'll have Kimberly go next and then Bill.
I just want to reiterate the message that Vince was saying, and I'm just going to keep it real, okay? Because you all said, bring your whole self. So let me just say this, okay? Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, we know in 1936 where we're coming from. We were this museum that was just for white folks. That was our beginning. That was our middle. but is that going to be where we're going in the future? We've said no, that's not going to happen. We have addressed so many issues, even within our museum, of what is it the story we're trying to tell? What are the true stories that we want to tell? Who are the people that are creating the art, that are creating the stories that we want to tell? How do we develop programs around these stories? Even staff, starting with our staff and hearing what their experiences have been within the Richmond community, with their interactions, even working at the Virginia Museum. You have to start at the core of the issue, and to talk about race. You just have to talk about it, and the Virginia Museum, we've started talking more about that. Part of the what we did just this past year in bringing Rumors of War, Kehinde Wiley's just amazing sculpture that we have out front. That was us saying, okay, we are acknowledging that, we have a lot to learn, a lot to say, a lot to create. We want to create these spaces for conversations about race, about reconciliation, but you still have to talk about the hurt and the trauma from the past. As a person that my family, bringing my personal experience, like many of you are sharing, I'm the great niece to John Mitchell Jr., who was the editor of the Richmond Planet. And the Library of Virginia, shout out to the Library of Virginia, that have always told the story of John Mitchell Jr., but most people have no idea who he was, that he was the first Black man to run for governor of Virginia. He was the first, just like with Maggie Walker, in establishing banks in the Virginia area, buying property on Broad Street. You think about this man, but you never know anything about him because his history was suppressed by individuals that did not want him to succeed. And so that family, that heritage, that trauma that came with that throughout our family, even to this day. I was born in 1963, he was born 1863. And here I am talking about him today, and I still feel the trauma of what he had to deal with in the past. So I made it a personal mission in any role that I had, that I was going to be true to myself, true to the moment, and be full on and full in on the type of work that I'm prepared to do to make sure that we are telling, squashing the big lie and telling the big truth. That's the way that I look at it. So I'm just so happy to be here today to be able to talk about my truth, but also where we're going as a museum.
Amazing. Kimberly, that's always the best. How do we reckon with this stuff? It's how do you reckon with history? And it really is about reckoning with the present. And reckoning with the present for us has meant that we have to go deep inside the institution, the people that work in an institution, and we've got to make it real. We got to make it real in the way we work in the community and try to experiment. We've done a couple experiments, that have been amazing projects over the last 6 months. The Don't Touch My Hair project with Dr. Chaz Barak was just an amazing collaboration that allowed us to do some things we haven't done before. Our work with Africana Film Festival, with the My Hair project, the mural project in our garden, My Flowers project in the garden. But it's also about looking at employment policies and procedures. It's going deep into the organization and saying, how do you do this? And so, it's like knowing that come March 1, Ms. B's, I'm going to do a little commercial, Ms. B's will be opening in the garden of Valentine, because we believe that's, if you're going to say you're going to invest in the community, you need to invest in the community. And that's the way you reckon with history, is you reckon with the present. And so, I think that's where we can play a different role in inspiring people to reckon differently.
Thank you, Bill. And for time's sake, I'm going to move us to the next question, but I'm going to ask you to answer it after I ask this question, because there are some folks who'd like to hear your answer. And you might be able to tie in both to this question. So it's, how is your organization addressing environmental trauma, such as the representation of oppressors and slaveholders in public spaces and the cultural underrepresentation of minority populations in education and art? And Joseph, if you don't mind starting, that would be great. If not, we can certainly.
Sure, I can kind of give to that one a little bit. You know, we do attempt at the American Civil War Museum to very proactively include as many voices and people as possible. If you ever walk into the actual gallery, there's a section before that which has a wall of faces, faces of many different people, many different types of folks, faces that you are familiar with and ones that you don't really know at all, really. And we try to put those prominently on display. And on a personal, and we tell that in our narrative as well, especially as we're giving those kind of conversations to our students, to our groups that do private tours, as we engage and expand the conversations in our public programming. But on a personal level, I would also argue that one of the interesting roles that I end up playing in the museum is that I come to this space in a non-traditional or through non-traditional means. You know, museums and are filled with people who have been, you know, steeped through the educational process as far as getting into the museum field, which creates a barrier to entry. And I happen to have the privilege of being the son of not just one, but two park rangers who have worked in the park ranger field or in the National Park Service for over 30 years. So I also happen to be steeped in history, but still through a non-traditional means. My mother now is still working at the supervisory ranger, in fact, at Maggie Walker National Historic Site. So a quick shout out to Agina Rogers out there and the great work that the Richmond Battlefield Park is doing. But I think one of the things that we also should do and really think about as museums, as cultural institutions, and as educational spaces is be aware of how we tell our stories as well and what sources we use. We often try to make it so that, you know, the only sources that we use are written sources. The only sources that we use are the sources, the things that survive, the pottery pieces that are still there. And we often end up dismissing the narratives and the things that could, because they've been passed down through generation to generation, may have been skewed a little bit, or we qualify it in a certain way. And I would encourage all of us here, as well as I do at the museum, to take a close, hard look. Because if we look straight at the history of Virginia in particular, after Nat Turner's rebellion, who wasn't allowed to learn how to read or write? How are we going to learn that? How are we going to rely on that source of written history if African Americans across the Commonwealth were forbidden to do this in the first place? For whom people like my ancestor, James Apostle Fields, from 7 generations back, he did learn to read and write, and in secret while he was living in Henrico County. And it was something that was immediately, if he had been found out, would have resulted in a huge disciplinary action, if not outright being sold off to someone else. And so if we are centering only the written sources, we are excluding the sources of people who wrote in a different language. I don't know how many people can speak Algonquin in this particular space, right? I know that when I was growing up, Lina Lenape, we didn't have many classes on that right around the Philadelphia area. We lose out on the stories that are told by indigenous peoples, by African Americans, by people that have not historically been centered And so we need to expand what it is that we use as primary sources. And I know that we need to, that's a controversial topic, especially in the museum world, but expanding our definition of primary sources should become paramount in order for us to open up and expand our actual equity and access to the space itself.
Thank you. You said a lot in there. I saw a lot of head shaking comments. And sometimes I think what you said is poignant, that sometimes racial truth and reckoning can be controversial, even in something as like the way we consider first sources. And it made me reflect as I was thinking about the narratives of my family and the history of Creole culture, and that some people in my family for generations could pass as white and some could not pass as white, and the racial narrative and history of that, and the trauma it has had on the children within my family. We still see those ripple effects today. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to also have an opportunity for any of our other panelists to answer that question as well.
Well, I just quickly add that over the last few years, in an ad hoc way that's moved into more of a formal effort, just looking at the language that we use, both in, my institution deals with the written word primarily. So, you're describing materials, you're writing about materials, you're writing blogs, you're doing these other forms of communication. And, anecdotally, going out and giving presentations pre-pandemic, the simple switch from the word slave to enslaved has made a huge difference in the way that people receive the information. And we hear comments, after presentations that those subtle changes, or I should say, those seemingly small changes did not go unnoticed by many in the audience. And those small efforts to make this information more accessible to people, is really key. So we're looking across the board. Again, when you're dealing with centuries old documents, you do have this issue of language and looking at how to present that in a way and being more conscious of how that comes forward to people. But to getting to Joseph's point, sort of ricocheting off of there a little bit regarding representation. The archival profession and cultural history organizations more broadly, but specifically archives I'm familiar with, has a representation problem that it has acknowledged. It has not attracted because of various barriers, whether it be educational or just the opportunity to know that such a profession exists. So how do we begin to address that so that in the future, candidates for positions look less like me and more like many people on this in this Zoom room? And one of the ways that we're looking at is to get more diverse pools of candidates, even to get people to understand that this and other aspects of the museum history field are options to them, is to get younger folks, Black and Brown students, in for paid internships to look, just to see, try on this hat for a while. Do you like it? Is this something you'd be interested in? Is this something you have a passion for? And just giving that option. And other opportunities to go out and speak to school groups, or invite teachers in so that they are more equipped to present primary source documents or firsthand materials to students in the classroom. So again, we often find that kids that we talk to in high school or early college years don't even know that this is a field that they might want to go into. So, looking at the other, organizations in the room, like thinking about getting folks in the door just to show them what the options are. And then maybe, down the line, a decade, we see, a much bigger pool of candidates, a more diverse pool of candidates when we are applying, have job openings.
Thank you for sharing that feedback, Vince. That was really compelling to me, and I learned a lot from hearing that. I want to move us to our last question, but when I ask that, for folks who are watching online, I know several of you have wanted to know if you could ask a question. So please be putting those into the comment section online. If you're in our Zoom room, put them in the chat so that we can get to them after this last question. So our last question for our panelists before we open it up to our online audience is, how can communities, in particular families and children and those who serve those demographics, pursue a journey of reconciliation, learning, and growth so that we can all work to create an equitable and just society for all through personal and professional development? And if you could reference some specific examples to volunteer continuously at your organization, engage in showcase, display, and if you have any COVID regulations, to please mention that as well. And it is open to any of our panelists who would like to start.
Well, I would say it's important that we, I appreciate what Brother Vince was saying about doing away with the delusion of America and the lies of America. And as far as personal development, I think we really have to do a very deep search of how many lies we still believe. When you think about the spiritual condition of America, one of the last sermons that Dr. King was supposed to deliver before he was assassinated was, America may go to hell, right? Because of the values. And so I know MLK Day is a day of service, but I think we have to understand that we are where we are in America, not because of a shortage of volunteers, but because of a shortage of values, right? When he talks about rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the rich, and the disparities that we see, that like we saw in the Capitol, when everybody's saying, hey, the response I saw this summer doesn't match the response that I'm seeing there because of this delusion that we hold. And so he asked a very key question: where do we go from here, chaos or community? And we have to understand that if we do not do the spiritual work that we need to do so that we can change our societal muscle memory to justice expanding, then America's historic and present and hopefully not future reaction to community expanding will always be chaos, because there's still people who feel threatened by the expansion of King's dream. When do we have to examine the lies we hold in which Dr. King's dream is somehow still a nightmare to us, and what it will cost us to realize it. And I definitely know that volunteering is important and mentoring is important, because we understand the still segregated society that we live in. It's just not a legislated segregation, and how crossing and understanding people's experiences that are different than you are important in helping us to challenge that societal muscle memory. But I think it's important that we begin to build habits to speak the truth. One of the things that I do is I'm trying not to say white supremacy and starting to say white delusion, right? Because the truth of the matter is, white people are not more supreme. There is not a justification for the violence that has happened. There is no explanation to say why this was okay. And understanding that it is delusion, and that delusion has consequences. It has consequences in our communities. It has consequences in our institutions when we think only a certain person who looks this way can lead, only a certain person that looks this way or talks or believes this way or loves this way can be a leader or asset to our community. And that's a lot of the work that we have to commit to doing together. Because that is how we go from chaos to community, as Dr. King said.
Thank you, and an opportunity for any of our other panelists to answer that same question.
Allison, I was also thinking that, we have to, as institutions, create these safe spaces, that people actually feel that they can trust the space that they are looking to engage with, you know, and at the Virginia Museum, we hope that individuals look at us as that space. You know, art is looked at as a healing space, as a conversational space, as a communication space. And so I think, you know, us in this, what I call almost this town square type of, you know, persona that we're hoping to continue to nurture, you know, we want to create these safe spaces and also safe opportunities. I just wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Vince was talking about with professional growth and opportunities, and how all this just connects up into how people view your institution. You know, having equity within your practices and transparency within that. If you look at the Virginia Museum, probably people don't know that about 50% of our executive leadership are people of color, and our 33% are women. And that is not just at the executive level, it goes throughout our whole organization that we've worked incredibly hard to develop. And we could not have done this without our community and our partners and people that are sitting on these screens right now. But I think in creating these safe spaces, I think that that's also really important to how an institution really connects to the communities that we serve.
Thank you. And there are a couple of, I have a couple of questions actually directed to the folks who are getting ready to unmute themselves. So if it's okay, I'm just going to ask you those specific questions from our audience. So this question is for you, Vince, at the Library of Virginia. There are several teachers who are watching today. I'm like, y'all are not even enjoying any of your time off. You're always seeking more education, which we love. But one of their questions was they'd like to know about the materials of awareness produced by the Library of Virginia or other museums that are here available that they could use to share with their students, and their students who are mostly mixed race and low income families.
Well, we have a lot of, there's a separate Facebook page for education at the Library of Virginia that's specifically geared towards teachers, that has a lot of content on it for educators. And in addition, we've had some success with what is sort of a volunteer project, but it's a project that you can do at home. We've partnered with Hands-On Richmond to coordinate volunteers, but it's something teachers have used in their classrooms as well. Making History Transcribe is a crowdsourcing site where we've digitized a lot of material and put it online, and we're utilizing essentially citizen archivists, folks who are interested in working with historical materials, learning more, and they go in and they can actually transcribe. We've got everything from 18th century court documents to in script to typewritten WPA life histories. So it's a way to engage with primary source materials that teachers have leveraged in classrooms to make that connection with students. It's as easy as Googling "Make History Transcribe," and then there's a registration button, and you can begin transcribing right then once you get a registration. And so I think the experience that we've had with our volunteers, and I'm sure this translates in the classrooms as well, is when our Virginia Untold material is in Making History Transcribe, and folks begin to work through these documents, and as I alluded to earlier, they get a firsthand account, often in the words of an enslaved man or woman, potentially being deposed in a court case or what have you, describing treatment or a life experience that they've had that really has the potential for an eyes wide open moment for them. It's certainly one that I experienced. I studied history, through undergrad and graduate school, and I didn't have any real sense of what enslavement was like until I looked at these documents and read these words. And I think it's, again, an access point for students, for young people, for anyone from all walks of life, as we've seen with our volunteer efforts, and it's totally virtual. We used to have in-person events pre-pandemic, but it's something you can do from the comfort of your home or from the comfort of classrooms. It's amenable to Zoom and other platforms like that for virtual education efforts as well. And I think it just allows that firsthand engagement with the primary source material that really opens people's eyes to maybe wondering, what else have I learned in the course of my life that perhaps is not 100% accurate, or was from a perspective that, was from a particular perspective, and typically from the dominant culture.
Thank you, Vince, for sharing that. And we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask for each panelist, I'm going to call on you one by one to give a quick one last, try to keep it to like 20 seconds, thoughts on today's event, anything else you would like our audience to share. So I'm going to start with you, Bill, and then I'll move along to our other panelists.
Did you really say 20 seconds?
Something like that.
When we think about our values as a community and a country, I think we'll just take it back to a quote from King. It's about our values, and the quote is, "Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." And I think that is the core of what we need to think about is, how do we love each other right now?
I needed to sit with that for a moment. Thank you. And I'll ask for Stephanie to go next.
I think a parting thought, I just want to underline the point that Joseph made earlier, is that our complicated, imperfect history is the history of our country. But I take that as something that's really empowering as an individual. And how can I, as a flawed human, make and accomplish a difference and move that arc toward justice in my present life? And I use inspiration from the past to drive my choices today. And that's something that's really comforting and motivating to me and in my work also.
Thank you. And Joseph?
So I'm trying to condense everything in what my final parting thoughts are. I really think that as we go about this work in the museum field, in the education field, and in our daily lives, I think I would like to encourage everyone to think of it as mutual aid, especially in the museum world. Museum work is mutual aid. We do not exist without our communities, and our communities grow at a slower rate without us. And so it is important for us all to come together in that space and know that we are doing this together and that we can work together to create something and build something that lasts with a legacy that goes far beyond what we can imagine today, and creating, as we like to say, a space in which we are our ancestors' wildest dreams.
Thank you. And Kimberly?
I would just like to say, because my colleagues here on the panel have kind of captured a lot of my thoughts, but just continuing to stay true to yourself and to your voice, and to use that voice to further the cause of truth, being honest, being caring, kind, and nurturing of all the voices that we heard. Be that ally, be that cheerleader. And King talked a lot about in the drum major speech as well, about really using that voice, no matter how hard it may be at times. So I'm just wishing that for everyone here and those that are out on Facebook.
Thank you. And Vince, closing thought. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm always impressed with the museum community in Richmond, and especially been gratified as a viewer to see how many efforts have been made within the last few years to do exactly many of the things that we've been talking about here by so many of the folks who are representing these institutions on this panel. Just as someone who's been in Richmond for 20 years, I see the change that is happening and the way that institutions that were, may have once been perceived one way are taking an active role in the pursuit of social justice that is underway right now. And that's encouraging to me, and the words that everyone shared today. And I just would close echoing Joseph's effort that we're doing this together, and we should be able to lean on each other and put our good work, join our good work together in this effort to make a more just society.
Thank you. And Alan, last word.
Yes, last word. I think as we are institutions of power and education and art, I think it's important. One of my favorite quotes by Dr. King is, power at its best is love ceding to the demands of justice, which also can tell us that sometimes demands is justice speaking in a tone we don't often recognize. And that I think it's important for us to, within beloved community as the key, right? Understanding that we are placed in certain positions and we have the power, which is a good thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's a power to change the course of which we've been. We can be a hammer instead of an anvil. We can be a thermostat instead of a thermometer. But it requires us to be listening, to be engaged, as I know a lot of the institutions here are doing. And even in our personal lives, just being aware to the calls of justice and when it calls us in ways you may not recognize. Because that is the voice of love and sometimes the voice of Dr. King. So thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our panelists for such an insightful conversation. I wish we had more time for fruitful conversation. I could listen to this all day. I would say for me, it has made me reflect on my position in motherhood and things that I want to tell my almost 3-year-old son this evening and the child that I am ready to give birth to right now. I have just learned so much from this conversation and the truth and history that I hope to share with them as their mother. Now I'm going to pass the mic back to Chloe Edwards, who will close.
Thank you, everyone, and panelists and artists. Feel free to post resources and ways to engage with your organizations on the Facebook live feed for those attending virtually to access. Thank you all for joining us today, including the artists, panelists, cohort members present, and those tuning into this important conversation. We invite you to be part of the solution. Collectively, we can start with systemic change by supporting Delegate Aird's House Joint Resolution 537 to declare racism as a public health crisis in Virginia. Sign on and support at vakids.org. Take action. I'm going to ask my colleagues to post that direct sign-on link as well. There are numerous steps that Virginia can take to address systemic racism and its impact on public health, including expanding the charge of the Virginia Department of Health's Office of Health Equity to address racism as a public health crisis and ensure that statewide policy efforts are analyzed from an intersectional lens. Retaining the commission to examine racial inequity in Virginia law as a permanent commission, requiring training for elected officials, staff members, and state employees to combat implicit biases, establishing a glossary of terms and definitions concerning racism and health equity, and then lastly, engaging with communities most impacted. This is also the inaugural year of Voices Equity Impact Statements in Early Childhood Education, Mental Health, Child Welfare, and Trauma and Equity. These equity impact briefs analyze disaggregated data to get at the heart of the tree policy solutions introduced this session and the impacts of them. You will find data and talking points to communicate the impact, the policy solutions in each of our issue areas on our site. I'm going to ask my colleagues to post that link as well. Join Voices as an advocate this General Assembly session by subscribing to our listserv at vakids.org. Navigate our Racial Truth mini site and initiatives, including opportunities to join our Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia Coalition and its committees. Click our events page to join us for the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Virginia, Racial Truth and Reconciliation Digital Advocacy Day, January 25th. You can also find advocacy trainings in our social media toolkit on our website. And then I'm just going to close by saying, in truth and reconciliation, we have the power to make things different and ignite change. Ashe. Thank you for joining us today.